It was a cold, foggy night when the group of friends finally arrived at the entrance of the old Crenshaw Amusement Park, a place that, years ago, had been the pride of the town but was now shrouded in moss and abandonment. The park was located on the outskirts of a small town in the American Midwest, far enough away to be easily forgotten, but close enough to spark strange and macabre rumors. The legends surrounding the place were numerous, and for the teens, that night was their chance to prove it was all just stories meant to scare kids. None of them really believed the tales of disappearances or the mysterious clown that was never found. They were there to have fun. "What do you think, guys?" "Let's make history," said Jake, the boldest of the group, as he pulled his phone from his pocket to start filming. The camera turned on, capturing the reflection of the park's rusted facade, where the old sign still read "Fun for the whole family" in faded, barely legible letters. The sound of their footsteps echoed down the deserted road as they walked toward the rusted gate. The air of mystery, though palpable, felt more like excitement than fear for the teens. Among the friends was Laura, the skeptic of the group, who saw no reason to be worried. She laughed at the idea that a clown could really be haunting the park. "It's just an old, run-down place. Nothing weird. Let's just film it and leave," she said, glancing at the gate with disdain. Yet, she couldn't shake a strange feeling deep in her throat, something she couldn't explain. Everyone tried to ignore the growing sense of unease. The gate was locked, but Jake, ever the leader, found a way in. Summoning his courage, he pushed one of the rusty bars aside, making just enough room for the group to squeeze through. As the last of them slipped through, the iron gate creaked and closed on its own, making an odd sound, as if the park was sealing them in. No one dared to look back. They were inside now, and curiosity outweighed every other feeling. Inside the park, the scene was eerily silent. The Ferris wheel, once a gathering spot for families, now stood still, its cables and ropes creaking in the wind. The carousel, which had once played cheerful music, was now motionless, its colorful, warped horse figures mocking their former glory. The group pressed on, guided by the glow of their phone flashlights. Some attractions still had dim, flickering lights, but the atmosphere was heavy and unnerving. "Let's go to the clown house," Jake said, pointing toward a structure in the distance, rising like a monster of wood and iron. "That's where they say the real stuff happens." The group agreed, eager to explore what had become the park's most feared attraction. The stories they'd heard in history class about the park spoke of a string of unexplained disappearances in the 1980s during the performances of a clown named Mr. Jinx. The children who attended the shows were never seen again. The clown, they said, vanished mysteriously, and the park closed shortly afterward. As they approached the clown house, the place looked even darker than they'd imagined. The entrance was covered in dried leaves and cobwebs, and the doors were partially open, as if waiting for them. Jake pushed the door, which groaned loudly, and they all stepped in cautiously. Inside was a nightmare scene, walls adorned with drawings of grinning clowns whose faces seemed unsettlingly distorted, and a staircase leading to an upper floor barely visible in the beam of their flashlights. The air was thick, stifling, and smelled of rotting wood and mildew. "This is more than just a poorly maintained attraction," Laura said, the first to voice discomfort. A shiver ran down her spine, but she brushed it off, trying to maintain her relaxed demeanor. The group began exploring, with Jake's camera capturing the eerie details: clown figures with bulging eyes and unnatural grins, broken, old toys that seemed to wait silently to be touched. Then something caught Jake's eye, a vintage clown mask hanging on the wall beside a cracked mirror. The reflection on the camera's screen looked off. He filmed it for a few seconds and then noticed, in a flash, that the clown's smile on the mask seemed to shift, like a distortion in the reflection. "Hey, check this out," he exclaimed, pointing to the object. But as the group gathered around, the sense of unease deepened. On Jake's camera screen, the mask began to faintly glow, reflecting the phone's light. But as he reached out to take the mask off the wall, his flashlight started flickering inexplicably. The wind outside seemed to grow louder, as if something had been unleashed, and a faint, almost imperceptible giggle echoed from somewhere in the shadows. The group froze. "This isn't normal," Laura said, now visibly uneasy. Before they could react, something in the back of the house seemed to stir. Suddenly, a dark shadow darted past the open doorway of the clown house. "Did you see that?" one of the friends, the most timid of the group, asked in near panic. But when everyone turned to look, there was nothing there, only the sound of the wind whispering outside. Yet something was undeniably present. What once seemed like an innocent exploration now felt alive, and whatever inhabited that park didn't intend to let the teens leave easily. The camera captured it all, but no one could laugh anymore. What had started as a night of fun had turned into a desperate confrontation with something they couldn't comprehend. The horror had begun, and as the door to the clown house shut behind them, the park, now deathly silent, seemed to become a prison. The air was heavier now. Each step the group took seemed to echo louder than the last, and a sense of claustrophobia began spreading among them. Jake, still holding the camera, kept filming, but the excitement had been replaced by growing tension. He glanced at his friends, trying to keep calm, but Laura's eyes were wide, and fear had taken over her face. "I don't like this," she murmured. The sound of the wind outside, once just part of the atmosphere, now felt more menacing, as though it carried something watching them. "Come on, guys, it's fine. Just a scare. Let's get out of here," Jake said, trying to stay optimistic. He led the group toward the exit of the clown house, but as they neared the door, something strange happened. The door, which had been slightly ajar, now seemed to have shut on its own. The creak of the wood echoed in the air, like a warning. "That's not possible," Ryan, the most skeptical of the group, said as he tried to force it open. But it was locked from the inside, somehow, inexplicably. Panic began to spread as the shadows at the back of the house seemed to move, even though there was no strong wind. Something was in the park. And something wasn't going to let them leave so easily. "What are we waiting for? Let's find another way out," Alex suggested, already nervous. But before they could react, a low, eerie laugh reverberated through the walls of the house. It was a laugh that seemed to come from all directions, a sound that made the hairs on the back of their necks stand on end. It wasn't just a single voice, it sounded like the laughter of a crowd. A chilling sensation crept over them. Something was watching them, something more than just an abandoned attraction. Jake tried to stay calm. "I'm filming all of this, it's going to be epic. This will blow up," he said, more to himself than anyone else. But the camera started to distort, as if the lens were being interfered with by an unseen force. The image flickered, and the shadows stretched and contorted, taking on sinister shapes. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of their heavy breathing. Then they heard it, the first sound of movement. Not the wind, but the creaking of the carousel outside. The sound of wood groaning, horses rocking, and an off-key melody playing faintly. With each turn of the carousel, the faces of the clown figures seemed sharper, more lifelike. The eyes of one of the horses, which had been lifeless before, now glowed a bright yellow, as if watching them, as if alive. "Did you hear that?" "What was that?" Ryan asked, his voice trembling as he pointed to the carousel, now moving on its own, despite the wind having stopped. "It's happening again," Laura whispered, her eyes fixed on the figure of a clown on the carousel, its lips stretched into an impossibly wide grin. Something was very wrong, and she felt it in every fiber of her being. They needed to leave, but the park wouldn't let them. Suddenly, a loud, metallic groan echoed through the park. It was the Ferris wheel. It had started to turn slowly, its cabin swaying slightly in the air. The sound of its movement was labored, as though it were struggling to spin, yet no one was aboard. No wind drove it. The machine moved on its own. "This can't be real," Alex muttered, backing away without knowing where to go. But as he moved, the park attractions seemed to come alive with him. The carousel sounds grew louder, following his steps, and the flickering lights of the Ferris wheel illuminated the clown faces in a haunting play of light and shadow. The images on Jake's camera shook more violently, as though something were actively trying to disrupt the recording. "I said we shouldn't have come," Ryan stammered, visibly terrified. "We're not alone here. Something is hunting us." He stepped back, trying to distance himself from the encroaching shadows, but as he turned, one of the carousel figures seemed to have moved. A clown, with a distorted face, was staring directly at him, its eyes blinking with a supernatural intensity. "This isn't right. We need to leave now," he shouted, sprinting toward the park's entrance gate, the way they had come in. But when they reached it, something even more sinister awaited. The gate was closed, locked, as if they had never passed through it. What's going on? How is this possible?" Alex asked, his voice breaking. The gate was sealed, though they were sure it had been open earlier. The park was no longer letting them leave. They were trapped. A low, distorted laugh came from somewhere in the park. And then, a figure emerged from the shadows. "The clown." "Mr. Jinx," Jake whispered, his eyes wide with terror. The clown, once a simple circus entertainer, now appeared more like a supernatural entity, a presence feeding on fear, a twisted manifestation of the park itself. He stood before them, his grin unnaturally wide, his eyes hollow, his presence making the walls of the clown house tremble. His face twisted, at times grinning, at times completely expressionless, but what terrified them most was his silence. He watched them, calm, as if waiting for something to unfold. "We can't get out. We're trapped here," Laura said, her voice barely audible through the panic. "He wants us to stay. He won't let us leave." The rides around them seemed to come alive again, now with an air of menace. Lights flickered, the park attraction sounds intensified, and at the center of it all, Mr. Jinx continued to observe them. The game had begun, and it seemed there would be no winner. Cliffhanger, Jake's camera, still recording, captured the figure of the clown moving toward them with a slow, deliberate pace, as if carefully choosing who would be next to disappear. The final frame showed Mr. Jinx's grotesque smile, stretched wider than ever, as he approached. The group was now entirely at the mercy of whatever the park had become, a prison where fear turned real. Panic spread like wildfire. The group was surrounded, the clown house now feeling more like a prison than an abandoned attraction. Mr. Jinx, the shadowy figure, watched them closely, as if waiting for someone to make a mistake before pouncing. But he didn't move. He stood there, silent, his grotesque smile stretched across his face, his vacant gaze fixed like a predator stalking prey. The walls of the clown house seemed to close in, the air heavy like a cold fog pressing against their lungs. They couldn't stay there much longer. But where exactly were they? Jake tried to stay composed, but the inescapable terror gripped them all. The camera was still recording, capturing everything, the terrified faces of his friends, the muffled laughter echoing from somewhere distant. But none of it seemed to matter anymore. Fear had completely consumed them. "We need to find a way out," Laura said, her voice trembling. She was beginning to realize something she hadn't fully understood before. The park wasn't just alive, it wanted them there. They had become part of its story, part of something far darker and more sinister than a mere abandoned amusement park. Mr. Jinx's low laughter seemed to seep into their minds, reverberating off the walls, spreading through every corner of the park. It was as if the place itself was mocking them. The camera's flashlight flickered, illuminating the faces of the clowns painted on the walls. Their eyes were fixed, like watchers of a personal hell. But what none of them realized was that something even more sinister was about to be revealed. "Wait," Jake said, cutting through the rising panic. "Let's think. Let's stay calm. We need to understand what's happening here. Maybe there's something we can do." He began walking through the space with the camera, filming every detail, searching for a clue, a way to break the cycle of terror. That's when he found something no one expected, an old file hidden behind a broken shelf covered in dust and cobwebs. It was a folder of documents, filled with yellowed newspaper clippings and faded photographs. The title on the cover read, "The Crenshaw Case, Disappearances and the Clown Mr. Jinx." Laura, her face pale, stepped closer. "What is this?" she asked, her voice shaky. Jake, his eyes fixed on the file, began flipping through the pages. The articles were chilling: children vanishing mysteriously during events at the park, all connected to a clown who had been hired to entertain at town festivals. But more disturbing were the photos. In one, the clown, Mr. Jinx, stood in front of one of the park's attractions, wearing an expression that didn't seem human. He was smiling, but the grin looked distorted, and his eyes were completely dark, with an otherworldly gleam. Most horrifying of all were the children surrounding him. Their faces were blank, as if they were being pulled towards something unseen. They weren't smiling. They were absent. "What does this mean?" Ryan asked, struggling to make sense of it. But no one had an answer. They were trapped in a nightmare without explanation. Jake turned another page and found something that made his stomach churn. A newspaper clipping about the park's closure. In 1986, after a series of mysterious incidents, Crenshaw Amusement Park was permanently shut down, it read. But the final line of the article sent chills down their spines. The clown known as Mr. Jinx was never found. Reports suggest he may have made a dark pact with forces beyond this world. "This can't be real," Laura murmured. "This can't be possible." But the evidence was right there, staring back at them. Mr. Jinx, once a quirky and amusing entertainer, was now revealed as a dark entity, a force that had transcended humanity and become something more. Something that was tethered to the park, feeding on fear in the souls of the children who had once roamed its attractions. The group was now in shock. But something even more disturbing lay ahead. As Jake continued flipping through the documents, he came across something no one wanted to see. On a torn, blood-stained page were the names of several missing children, all dated near 1986, with the name Jinx scrawled beside each. He's not just watching. He's taking souls," Jake stammered, his eyes wide, struggling to process the horrifying truth. Before they could ask more questions, a strange vibration ran through the floor. The entire park seemed to tremble. They heard the sound of the rides moving again, but this time it was more intense, more desperate. The Ferris wheel, which had been still until now, began to turn once more, its cabins swinging violently as if pulled by invisible hands. The carousel, too, spun irregularly, its horses rocking chaotically. Mr. Jinx's low laughter grew louder, closer, as though it was coming from inside their own minds. "He's watching us," Alex whispered, barely able to speak. "We're being hunted." And before anyone could respond, the lights began to flicker, and the clown house doors slammed shut abruptly. The group was now sealed inside, with only Jake's camera light to illuminate their surroundings. Then, a final revelation occurred. On the wall next to the door, an ancient inscription appeared, as if being etched before their eyes. The letters were red, made from something viscous and thick, like dried blood. "Your fun is over," the message read, signed with a grotesquely distorted signature, "Mr. Jinx." Cliffhanger, the ground shook once more, and Mr. Jinx's laughter now echoed from every direction. Something was about to happen, and no one knew what it was. But the terror was far from over. The air had grown thicker. The group of friends, now more desperate than ever, was trapped inside the clown house, unsure where to turn. The laughter of Mr. Jinx echoed through the walls, his imposing presence felt in every corner of the house. The flickering lights cast strobing flashes that distorted the shadows around them, creating an overwhelming sense of disorientation. The clown, with his grotesque smile, was somewhere nearby, watching, waiting. But he did nothing, not yet. He was merely toying with them, moving them like pieces on a macabre chessboard. The inscription on the wall, written in what appeared to be blood, remained as a chilling warning: "Your fun is over." But what did it mean? How could they escape something so far beyond their understanding? They tried prying the door open, pounding on the walls, even shouting for help, but all they were met with was silence. The entire park was eerily still now, save for the laughter. And the unshakable feeling of being watched clung to them like a shadow. Laura's eyes brimmed with tears, but fear kept her sharp. "We need to move. Staying here is worse than being caught." She had begun to grasp the truth. The clown didn't want them dead, not yet. He wanted more. He wanted to see them unravel, lost and desperate, as the terror took hold. He wanted them to become part of his story, part of his twisted attraction. Jake, though shaken, managed to focus on the camera, documenting everything. He believed it might be their only chance to understand what was happening. "Look," he said, showing the screen to his friends. "The inscription, the photos, the stories. He's not a normal clown. He's something else. He's what this park has become." But with every movement, the camera seemed to distort further. The flashlight flickered, the image blurred, and for a brief moment, Jake swore he saw a shadowy figure pass in the background, floating, inhuman. He's not alone, is he?" Ryan asked, his eyes wide with terror. "The park, it's not just haunted. The park is him." Then Alex, trembling, pointed toward the back of the house, where a side door was now slightly ajar, as if inviting them to notice it. "Look at that," he whispered, his voice barely audible but tinged with panic. "That door wasn't open before, was it?" The door seemed less like an exit and more like a gateway to another layer of the nightmare. What disturbed them most was the sound emanating from beyond, a muffled, almost childlike laughter, as though others, or things, were finding amusement in their plight. "We can't stay here," Laura said, stepping toward the door with a determination that belied her fear. "This has to end." The door creaked as they pushed it open. The hallway beyond was suffocatingly dark, the air colder still. Each step echoed louder than the last, the sound seeming to stretch out into the void. Their pounding heartbeats were the only noise they could hear as they ventured into the darkness. But with every step, the environment warped further, as if reality itself were fracturing around them. The walls were lined with old posters of park shows, but the images were grotesquely distorted, the clowns' grins twisting into expressions of agony. Suddenly, a door in front of them creaked open. Dust coated its surface thickly, and as they pushed it further, a blast of icy air greeted them. Inside was a small room with a high ceiling, and in its center was a chilling sight. A broken, antique rocking chair sat under a dim, flickering light. Beside the chair lay a toy box, half open, with a porcelain doll perched atop it. The doll's painted smile was eerily artificial, its glassy eyes hollow, and its disheveled golden hair draped over its shoulders. The doll faced the chair, as if waiting for something, or someone. This is insane," Ryan muttered, his voice barely audible. "What is this?" Laura stepped cautiously toward the rocking chair, her movements slow and deliberate. Suddenly, the light began to flicker erratically, casting shadows that danced violently. The chair started rocking gently, as though moved by unseen hands. Then the doll's head shifted. Its porcelain smile widened unnaturally, its empty eyes now pitch black. The doll blinked, and when its eyes reopened, a low, childlike giggle escaped its lips, a sound devoid of innocence, dripping with malice. "You're all playing hide and seek," the doll whispered, its voice distorted, "and no one is going to escape." Reality itself began to unravel. The room twisted and contorted, the walls seemed to collapse inward, the floor bowed upward as though the space were folding in on itself. "This isn't happening," Jake whispered, panic overtaking him. "We can't be trapped in this. This can't be real." But deep down, he knew it was. They weren't just trapped in the park, they were ensnared in a mental labyrinth where logic and reason no longer applied. Mr. Jinx wasn't merely a clown or a ghost. He was the embodiment of the park, the manifestation of its decades of false joy and hidden horrors. And now, he was inside their minds, breaking them down, blurring the line between the real and the surreal. The doors slammed shut behind them with a deafening bang, and maniacal laughter filled the air, an orchestra of chaos. "Now," a cold, chilling voice whispered, "the real fun begins." Cliffhanger, the floor beneath them began to crack and split open, revealing a vast, yawning abyss below, faintly illuminated by a dim, pulsing light. As the laughter intensified, the friends realized the horrifying truth: the only way out was to descend into the darkness, where Mr. Jinx waited for them to join his final, twisted game. The ground was opening beneath their feet, swallowing everything around them. Jake, Laura, Ryan, and Alex stood frozen, staring at the expanding darkness below, a bottomless abyss. The cruel, mocking laughter of Mr. Jinx grew louder, echoing through the walls of the clown house. It sent shivers through every fiber of their bodies. "No!" Laura screamed, throwing herself backward to avoid falling into the widening chasm. "We can't go down there." But gravity had other plans. The ground beneath them was crumbling, chunks of wood breaking apart and disintegrating as if the very park were unraveling. The walls of the clown house began to close in, squeezing tighter and tighter, compressed by some unseen force. Every step away from the chasm made the space around them shrink further. It was as though the place itself was determined to trap them, to bind them in an eternal nightmare. Jake, trembling, turned to his camera and tried to record the scene. But the image distorted, the device vibrating as though touched by some supernatural force. Suddenly, the twisted face of Mr. Jinx flashed on the screen, deformed, his dark eyes gleaming like a vortex. The screen flickered, and in the blink of an eye, the clown stood before them, his figure solid, his presence suffocating. "You thought you could escape," hissed a voice, low, hollow, and devoid of emotion, like the abyss below. "The game isn't over. The real game is just beginning." The clown, Mr. Jinx, stood in the center of the room, grinning wider than ever, his grotesque smile stretching impossibly far. He seemed to grow, his form merging with the park itself, as though he embodied the terror that had infested the place for years. "You entered my domain," he said, his voice reverberating in their minds. "Now, you are my toys. And everyone who steps inside plays by my rules." The laughter became a constant drumbeat, pounding in their ears, filling the air with its sinister rhythm. Jake felt panic clawing at him, but a sliver of clarity broke through the fog. He turned to Laura and Ryan. "We can't run, guys." "But maybe we can fight him," Jake said, determination in his voice. "He is the park, this thing. If we can find a way to destroy him from within, we might break the cycle." Ryan looked around, wide-eyed and desperate. "Ow! How do we fight that?" "He's not just a monster," Laura said, her breath shaky but steadying. "He's the park. He's been fed by people's fear for decades. Whatever happened here, it's what's keeping him alive. Maybe it's the fear that's keeping us here." Jake's eyes locked on the clown, and an idea formed. "The fear. That's it. We need to take the fear away from him. That's his power." He looked at his friends with renewed urgency. "If we can confront what we're most afraid of, we might weaken him." But before they could act, the room began to spin. The entire park, like a demented carousel, whirled around them. Walls stretched and twisted, carnival rides moved on their own, and the laughter of Mr. Jinx filled every direction. The painted eyes of clowns on the walls followed their every move, as if they were alive, watching, waiting. "You think you can defeat fear? Challenge what is eternal," the clown's voice thundered, his tone ancient and primal, as if he were the very essence of the park. "I am the terror humans created. I am the nightmare that never ends. No! You won't control us anymore." Laura shouted, her voice fierce with resolve. She stepped forward, staring directly at Mr. Jinx, her fear replaced with defiance. "You feed our fear, but we're not afraid of you anymore." Ryan stepped forward next, clutching something he hadn't realized he was holding, a rusty, old key they had found deep in the park. "Maybe this is it," he said, staring at the key as if it held an answer. "The key to breaking the cycle. The key to freeing everyone trapped here." "That's it," Jake agreed, gripping his now useless camera like a lifeline. "The key isn't just to escape. It's to destroy this place. Destroy the terror." With newfound courage, the group faced the clown, each standing firm against their own fears. The key began to glow faintly, as if unlocking an unseen force. The park trembled, the shadows on the walls writhing as if in pain. "No! You can't do this!" Mr. Jinx roared, his form starting to unravel, the essence of the park ripping apart with him. "I am immortal. I am fear itself. You can't destroy me." But the friends, now united, didn't falter. "We're stronger than fear," Laura declared, her voice steady and powerful. "And together, we'll end this." They inserted the key into a small, barely visible hole in the wall of the clown house. A blinding light erupted, engulfing the entire park. The laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by a deafening silence. The darkness lifted, and the twisted forms of the park began to crumble. The carousel halted, the painted clowns faded, and the oppressive air disappeared, replaced by stillness. The park, once a monument to terror, was no more. The weight of Mr. Jinx's presence had vanished. Yet, as relief washed over them, a lingering unease settled in. What remained of them after enduring such horror? What had been lost in the fight against fear? As they looked out over the ruins of the park, now quiet and lifeless, one thought lingered: though they had won, the cycle of fear could never truly be broken. Fear, like a shadow, would always exist, eternal, waiting to return. Conclusion: Mr. Jinx was defeated, and the park was destroyed. But the fear that had fueled him lived on, buried deep within the survivors, a reminder that the true power of terror lies within the human mind, where it can never truly be extinguished.